Hi, and welcome to this Stockholm Pride 2020 seminar on LGBTQI and intersex. The reason why we're hosting this is partly because RFSL last year added the I to the LGBTQI, and the last couple of years a lot of global and international LGBTQI organizations have done the same. And there's been a lot of talk within the intersex movement and the LGBTQ movement about how we can cooperate and strengthen each other. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And my name is Frank Berglund. I'm the vice chair of RFSL, the Swedish LGBTQI Federation. And this is Del. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Della Grace Volcano. I'm an activist and an artist and a MAPA, living in Sweden for the last 14 years.
And you're also active in OII Sweden?
Yeah, I founded with Ellie Norfelt and we founded OII Sweden, and before that we called ourselves Intersex Scandinavia. So I guess we've been trying to kickstart an intersex movement in Sweden for the last 10 years.
That's great. How many are active members today?
I would say we have about 5 or 6 active members. And that's up from 2, which was Ellie and I for a long time, and then 3. So I think we have 3, maybe 4 more, and hoping to grow the movement much larger than that. But I'm feeling good that we're that many now, because it took a long time.
Yeah, that's good. So a lot of people who are watching this have maybe never heard the word intersex before. So I was thinking that maybe you could give a definition of what intersex is.
Sure. Well, intersex is a kind of umbrella term for a wide variety of variations, but basically the definition OII uses is we have bodies that don't conform to the traditional definitions of male or female. So this can be variations in reproductive organs, genitals, chromosomes, hormones. So basically it has to do with the body. Sometimes this is intersex is picked up at birth, and this is what most people think about. If they know about intersex, they think it has to do only with genitals, because children who have genitals that are called ambiguous are, when they're not quite sure, is that a large clitoris or a small penis? That's often how intersex is assigned at birth, or they notice a child is intersex. But oftentimes, intersex variations are not noticed until puberty, or even after, or sometimes not at all.
Yeah. And there's also the medical term of disorders of sexual development, or DSD.
Sure, there have been other terms. When I first told my cousin, when I found my cousin, who I suspected was intersex in the mid-90s, and I said, I think you're intersex, she had no idea what I meant. So I had to say, used to be called hermaphrodite, but that's a mythological term and it's not really used anymore. And then, which I think is great, but there is also a queer perspective, like I call myself a hermaphrodite, sometimes to honor my dyke past. And I can play with the words a little bit more, but hermaphrodite is not, what is people are most familiar with, like hermaphrodite, but we don't use that because it's very offensive to some people, and we are not mythological creatures. We are real humans that have a variation. What was
I've heard a lot of doctors talk about the word DSD.
DSD, yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a very contentious term. Some people that are more progressive will call it variations in sex development or differences of sex development rather than disorder. But it's really contentious politically within the intersex movement because we prefer to use intersex rather than disorder, naturally. Who wants to be seen as a disorder? And it's very pathologizing. Yeah. So most activist group and advocacy groups use intersex rather than more pathologizing, medicalized terminology.
Can I ask how you identify yourself?
Sure. I say my sex is inter or intersex. My gender is non-binary. And my sexual orientation, I could say is nobody's business, but pansexual or queer is something, queer is a term I embraced decades and decades ago. So that works for me, but for me, queer is more of a political stance, which I embrace. It's about resistance and questioning norms.
Yeah, we were actually out of intersex flags today, so this is a non-binary flag.
Yay, yay.
So maybe this is also something I also want to ask is, because a lot of people who may not be super involved in the trans movement or the intersex movement might confuse those a bit. I think it's about the same thing.
Yeah. Trans for me is something that I wouldn't deny that I am, and I would say I'm identified as trans, but that was problematic for me because when I came out in the mid-90s, I came out as intersex, but it was also, it got completely erased. My intersexiness got completely erased because people assumed I was trans. And I was trans in the sense that I used to be perceived as female, and now I'm perceived as male, neither of which is true or right for me. So that's always been problematic, but I would say that there's a lot of similarities between trans masculine people and trans feminine people and myself. So we have common cause. But there's also some problems that I would not, I would say that my needs are different than a trans person's needs. Yeah. You know, my medical needs, for example, and my need to be, to have my identity and my body, you know, health issues, we can get into that, kind of the constant microaggression of always being perceived to be something you're not. And when I try to make interventions, I mean, I'm looking pretty butch today, I guess, but generally I try to make interventions, you know, as do you, I think, to make interventions into people's perception of me as a purely masculine creature. Yeah. But then I'm read as a gay man, and I've been queer bashed as a gay man, or I'm read as a trans man, which is okay, but it's still not me, you know. Or I'm looking as what if somebody is like, somebody thinks I want to be a woman, that I'm going from male to female. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah. Anyway, it's not confusing for me, but I can, you know, the majority of people I'll just let accept me as a, you know, short, chubby, middle-aged man. That's okay. Yeah. I can deal with it.
Yeah. But one thing that you also are kind of mentioning now that is shared between the intersex movement and the trans movement, or groups of people, is the struggle with the binary gender norms. Yeah. Can you mention some ways that the binary norms of like male and female affect intersex people?
I think the binary gender system is a human rights abuse for everyone. I think everyone is affected by that. I think the strength of the norm and the belief system that is built around the norm is harmful to cis people as well as trans people, as well as lesbian and gay people, but especially to intersex people, because our bodies are actually violated in order to fit the norm. So there's a lot of aggression and a lot of abuse that everyone faces, but not everybody has their genitals completely taken away and their ability to have sexual pleasure or reproductive freedom taken away because of the violence of the binary gender system norms. So I'm very happy, even though I have a problem with the term non-binary, I'm using it. I mean, who really wants to be a non-binary, non-entity, or ikke? Because ikke-binær, to me, is like yucky gender. You know, it's kind of like, I understand it, but it's got a cultural capital that genderqueer never really got. So I'll go with it. And I think that the fact that more and more people are embracing a more free from the binary perspective is good news for intersex people, because if the media takes hold, if it isn't such a stronghold, if people see you can live happy, healthy lives as a non-binary person, maybe there will be less reason to operate on a child to make their body conform to societal norms.
I'm also specifically thinking about Socialstyrelsen in Sweden. They did a report a couple of years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, when they talked to, because in Sweden there are, I think, 4 or 5 like local teams of doctors, nurses, surgeons, who, when a child is born and they can't assign a legal gender to that child, they are visited by one from these teams who are going to decide and if they need to do some medical intervention. And for some kids, they need a operation in order to pee or such. But Socialstyrelsen interviewed like every surgeon of every team, and everyone said that they were doing medical intervention for social reasons. That was like a big argument for them. And I think it's, in a way, I've also read like interviews with intersex people who have been grateful to have these operations because it saved them from, or they believe that they saved them from like bullying or harassment or like problems in school and such. So I think that also says a lot about, like, even when you are the person who gets non-consensual surgery on your genitals as a kid, and you're assumed to be like grateful because you might have saved some, like, it's so.
I haven't actually read any. I'd be interested to hear about intersex people who are saying thank you for these. I haven't, I know hundreds of intersex people, and I personally haven't had any experience personally with anyone who says, I'm glad I had those surgeries.
I've heard of very few, and a lot of those people might not define themselves as intersex now, but they have been, when you look at the definition of intersex, they are intersex, but they might not define that way.
And I think that's partly what the problem with the DSD label and the medical establishment is. They are trying to, I could stand for invisible. Like, if the doctors can fix us, if it is a syndrome or a disorder, then it's something you can get over. You were intersex rather than you are. Or, some people, I know intersex people who have, technically they would be intersex, they have XY chromosomes, they've had their internal testes removed, and they live quite happily in a lesbian context. And they're more masculine women, and they're quite happy with that. And they don't want to claim the intersex identity, or for some people it's not an identity at all, it's simply something that is part of their body. For other people, you know, I would say being intersex doesn't define who I am, but it is certainly a part of who I am. It's my, you know, I would say everyone's sex, you know, marker is a defining characteristic in some way too. So my problem with those teams and the Socialstyrelsens report is that they are not listening to us. So there are, I'm sure, a minority of intersex people who are saying, yeah, those operations were good for me, and I'm glad that my parents or the doctor team made that decision. There's far more who are saying, no, that is not what I want. This did not work for me. I have little to no ability to have a full sexual relationship, and people who have been lied to and treated as if they're a shameful family secret their whole life. That's certainly the experience I've had in my family, both with myself and my cousin. So it's really hard to know, and because I know that these teams, they don't have any gender critical perspective. You know, they are very much steeped in the binary. I know a lot of psychologists, a lot of really great queer intersex allies who are psychologists, and I know what kind of training they get, which is none. And it's all very normative, which is why I do the work I do about making art and making images of people that are people to be admired, not pitied. I have 2 children, both identify as non-binary, and far from being bullied, they're admired. And that's part of, I guess, my strategy in life, is like never be like a dog with its tail between its legs. Never show that you are somehow a victim. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I know as a trans person that has definitely helped me survive, just seeing other people in similar situations. And I'm also, I'm thinking so many things. You bring up so many great points. I was thinking about the situation in Finland, where there was, have you heard of that? The one surgeon?
Mika Vinhola.
Yeah.
Why do you think my oldest child is named Mika?
Right. Yeah, because that person was like the only surgeon in a specific region in Finland.
My hero.
Who had the like knowledge and was the only one able to do these surgeries. And then a lot of intersex people who he had operated on contacted him, and then he decided, I'm just not going to do it anymore. And then for a huge part of Finland, the surgeries just stopped overnight because he has one person took the stance.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that OII Sverige will be able to bring Mika Vinhola over to have when we have a bigger meeting with clinicians and practitioners.
I know there's a lot of people within certain of the teams in Sweden who are also like pushing internally, and I also read just like yesterday that a huge hospital in the US, in Chicago, just stopped their intersex surgery as well. So there's some sort of momentum now.
Yeah, I think that finally there is things. I mean, it's been a long time coming. I mean, I've been involved in intersex activism for 25 years now, and it seems very, very slow. But you wanted to also talk about the movement, right?
Yes, I just have one more question on this, like what is intersex block? We've been kind of going a bit back and forth, but that's fine. How common is it to be intersex?
Well, it depends on people's definitions of how you define intersex. And some medical definitions are very, very narrow. I think OII Sverige and OII International are very broad. So if you were to, the broadest, say, people with, what is it, ovarian, what is it?
I don't remember the...
It's when your ovaries produce a lot of testosterone too.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name, sorry. But it also accounts for a lot of women who have beards, or have, that would be, a body that doesn't conform to societal definitions. That would be a very, very open, and most clinicians would not include that. Other things like Hypospadias, when the penis or the urine goes through
tract goes through.
It can have a larger, or it's not from the tip of the penis. That's also something that is considered intersex by us, but clinicians, they're trying to make the definition narrower and narrower, because if we're rare, then we are kind of mythological creatures. Conservative estimates, and I actually, believe it or not, I'm a little more conservative. Some intersex people say as many as 1 in 100 people have some degree of intersex variation. I'm going to be more strict, and I would say that, follow the line that we are as common as natural redheads, which, believe it or not, I used to be, or identical twins. So there's also as many Jews as there are in the world. So, if you've ever seen an identical twin or a natural redhead, you have had contact with an intersex person.
Yeah, I think that's also, I think that someone in the documentary Intersection, which is really good, someone mentioned, because the DSD, it's a medical umbrella which has a lot of diagnoses within it, then it's not uncommon for intersex people to hear or you have this specific diagnosis and you are the only person you're going to meet in your life who has this diagnosis, and then don't know that you fall in a spectrum where you can meet hundreds of people who are in similar situations as you.
Yeah, absolutely. My cousin had no idea. She was just operated on at 16 and told she had cancer. She was completely clitorectomized when she was 4. They took away an ovotesty that was perfectly functioning because maybe it would be cancerous when there's actually no real evidence that internalized gonads, testicles that don't drop down are cancerous. There may be some risk, but it's not nearly as high as we have been told. And most of all, there's no research. We're still, the popular misconception that we are so rare is working against us in terms of any kind of funding for research around our issues. I have been on a low dose of testosterone for 25 years. And even when I have lost my testosterone, or I haven't had any extra testosterone for 6 months, this happened once, I lost it. And the doctor, the endocrinologist called me and he said, "Oh, there's a problem with your blood test." I said, I know, it must be really low. They said, "No, your testosterone's too high." I said, "But I haven't had any for 6 months. How could that be?" And it's too high for who? What are they measuring it against? So for me, it's really, really difficult to get any kind of legitimate health care. Nobody knows. They don't know.
No. And I think you're also touching upon why the term informed consent is such a key word within the intersex movement, where it's about not having to get or do medical decisions based on what the doctor thinks, based on binary gender norms, but instead okay, what do we actually know about this? What are the actual risks? Getting to decide of your own body in a greater term.
But I want to say something more about informed consent, because I know of intersex people who have given informed consent after consultation with a psychologist who has persuaded them that being part of the binary is that they will be happier if they can just be a woman or just be a man, even at the age of 18. And by not giving people who are in these patient groups or who have no idea that there are a lot of us around, by not giving them the information about our lives, then, and not saying the word intersex, means that it would be hard to put, something into a search engine. Although in this day and age, it's still pretty amazing to find that it, people might not know. But say, how can they have informed consent if the people who are part of their teams or people that the psychologists they're going to are not norm critical at all?
No.
That they just follow the norm, they follow the status quo, they believe the only way to be happy is to be a real man or a real woman or as close as you can get.
Yeah. And there's not truly well-informed consent, at least.
Yeah.
But let's talk a bit about the movements.
Okay.
Could you talk a bit about the state of the intersex movement in Sweden?
Well, we are growing, as I have mentioned. We would love for anybody out there who thinks you might be intersex or knows that you are intersex, or you've been told you have a DSD, anything like that. We'd love to hear from you, and we would love for you to join us. And I think it's hard for me because I was born in America, lived most of my life in England besides here, and I don't understand the Swedish reluctance to step up and say, yes, I mean, there's a big queer movement, so that's not a stigma. So what is the stigma against being intersex? I don't get it. I have been, since 1995, trying to find people to work with as a photographer, to stand up being intersex. And between 1995 and 2011, I found one other person.
Yeah.
In 2011, ILGA sponsored our first get-together in Brussels, and I photographed maybe 20 intersex activists. And since 2011, I think now I have almost 100 intersex people that I meet at conferences and get-togethers and community events. So the movement has grown enormously thanks to NGOs like ILGA and RFSL and others around the world. The Norwegian group gave us some support in the beginning when we were Intersex Scandinavia. So I think that there are factions. Not everybody has the same strategies, but I think that there's some organizations, particularly I would say in Australia and in America, and in the UK now as well, that are doing really great work, changing hearts and minds and interfacing with clinicians, which is really important, which is what we hope to do here too. We have gotten 2 grants. OII Sverige has gotten 2 Estrella grants.
That's great.
Which have been really useful. But persuading people in Sweden to be part of a group like ours fear of the queer, fear of standing out. I don't know.
Or maybe just like the plain access to information, like you don't know your medical history, you don't have that kind of access either for some people, I think. Because there has been in Sweden and also other parts of the world where there has been like two ways that the intersex movement has taken. In Sweden we've had, I don't think they're so active now, but INIS, who are more like medical focused, and there's the like more queer focused.
There's also the individual groups that are kind of constructed around each individual condition or variation. I say variation rather than syndrome or condition, but they're syndrome-based groups, and they're much more beholden to the doctors. You know, I think in my spoken word piece I have like, see if I can remember, Herm bodies are measured, we're prodded and poked, we're cut up and sold as a cultural joke. We're told we're disorders that doctors can fix, so we're no longer mixed. Something like that. It was a little bit better, but it's like this idea that we can be cured. You know, that we should want to be cured, and we should be grateful for being fixed, so we fit into society. You know, for me, fit as a chronic outsider my whole life. You know, I say I was born queer, born making trouble. So I have very little understanding for a desire to be average or ordinary or normal. Just doesn't fit for me. And I try to, but I do, you know, I also want to say if people are binary trans or binary intersex, just like I support my binary straight cis friends. You know, I don't think that you have an obligation to be non-binary if you're intersex or if you're trans. It's like if what feels comfortable for you is to be a man or to be a woman, whether you're intersex, trans, or cis, then I'm definitely in support of that. I don't think that I'm any better or any worse.
And I think a lot of people might also be afraid of being like the only one in their city or in their country in some places. And we were talking before we started recording about the state of the trans movement in Sweden. And like 10, 15 years ago or something like that, there was a big discussion within RFSL of like, can we add a T to LGB? And like, oh, there's so few trans people in the organization, we can't represent them. They want their own organization, it's a separate movement. But then as soon as RFSL started actively working and including trans people, the movement we're hundreds of people now.
Of course,
And it's estimated that trans people make up like between 0.1 to 1% of the population. So it's kind of similar estimates to the intersex population. And I really hope that we can strengthen each other's movements.
Well, what connects us is much bigger than what divides us. And when I have been queer bashed, it's not like I can say, hey, but you know, I'm intersex, you don't want to beat me up. I mean, it's like I've been beat up not even for being trans, but for being a gay man. You know, so the ways in which we are discriminated against is because we are not following the gender roles, the gender expression, the gender norms, basically. We're not obedient. We're not being compliant. And that is, for me, something to be admired, not to be despised. And yet, you know, it's like, why should we, a lot of people say, you know, intersex and trans are not about your sexual orientation. You know, you can be intersex and straight, gay, bi, asexual, whatever, and you can be trans the same. So it's more about our gender in terms of trans, I think, and sex in terms of intersex. What would you say? Why should we all be under the same umbrella?
Well, I think it's specifically that reason also that it's, I mean, the core is about like gender norms. Even when it comes to like the issues around sexuality, it's almost always centered around like gender norms. That it's like unwomanly to love another woman, for example. Like it's a lot to do with gender. And to me, it's also about, both when you look at like trans issues and intersex issues, it comes down to really, like it's the clearest example of like what really happens when we have this like binary society and why it's terrible for so many people. And also because a lot of intersex people are queer in other ways. And
trans.
And trans, and yeah, so I think, and there's also, when I'm talking so much about trans, it's also because I've been a trans activist for a long time now and see so many shared issues about like the medicalization of our bodies, the inaccess to, or lack of access to information, lack of gender confirming healthcare. It's, yeah, it would be a lot. And I've also heard a lot of trans activists, like you can sometimes forget the intersex perspective on those issues. Like when we had the issue of the new legal gender recognition law in Sweden, it also regulates genital surgery for trans people, or like people who want to change legal gender. And right now there is no age limit when it comes to intersex people. And then the law that was proposed a couple of years ago, they said that they would create an age limit for intersex people as well, without talking to the intersex community. And then as a trans activist, some people found it really easy to be like, well, this is good, but it's not good.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of shared issues, and yeah.
I mean, one example of an issue I could say is like when we met the school doctor when Mika was in the first grade. And this was relayed to me because Mika was with their other parent, who's very gender non-conforming, trans-masculine person as well, but the gestational parent. And they're talking, and the doctor's saying, so I understand that there's a problem with Mika's gender, and are you going to a gender identity clinic? And my partner was like, no, there's no problem with Mika's gender, and no, we're not going to a gender identity clinic. But Mika was assigned male at birth and had, at that time, a very feminine gender presentation. So there was this assumption so many people made that we had a trans child. And we never labeled Mika as a trans child. Maybe Mika will be trans, but since Mika could talk about it and declare themselves a gender, they said they were both from the age of 5. They've never said, I'm really a boy or I'm really a girl. They've always said, I am hen, you know, yaga hen, from the very beginning. And so this idea that we are, you know, that there's this path. If you have a gender nonconformity, should not be something that is labeled as trans or intersex or even queer. It's like we should all be allowed to be gender nonconforming if that's what we feel like. So that's one area where I feel like, you know, I don't want people to make assumptions about my children's gender and what that means in the long run. You know. And I would be, you know, I would just say that if it ever came down to either of them wanted to have surgery, I would be very concerned about genital surgery, particularly because of the intersex issues around genital surgery. It's like I didn't have genital surgery, but my cousin did, and I believe it's harmful. But if they needed it, I would want it to be the best care they could, and the best gender affirming care they could get. So I'm not against it, but I would be much happier for all trans and intersex people if everyone would realize that it's a societal problem. It's the binary gender system and the obligatory nature of that is the problem, not individual bodies.
Yeah. At least more people should be able to have that option, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. I think we need to start wrapping up a little bit. So, as a representative from the intersex movement, which ways do you feel that the larger LGBTQ movement could support your organizing?
I would like to see more funding coming from Sweden to our group. We're really, we got some funding and we're putting it all into revamping our website and to making more, having more of a presence online. But I think that inviting us to speak, helping us to interact with the teams. And I mean, RFSL has been doing this. I've had many meetings over the years that have been at the behest, what would I say, with the intervention, the support of RFSL. We have had support, but I think we could have a lot more because I think people are still, because it still feels like it's so rare because there are so few of us. I mean, if people had friends that they thought were intersex, if they would just get in contact with us, go to our website, which I think is oisverige.se, OII Sverige.se, that it would be great. And I would like, today I'll be photographing my intersex colleagues for Visibly Intersex, so they can join the more than 100 intersex activists and being visible. And we look like, it's kind of like some of us look non-binary, some of us look trans, some of us look cis, We look basically like everybody else.
Yeah.
And we are. And we are special, I think.
Yeah. And is there, the final question I had is if you in like one sentence could say something that you wish everyone watching this knew about intersex people or the intersex movement.
I think the main thing is that we exist. The information is out there. There's a lot of information online that is really good. If you go to any of the OI, which is Organization Intersex International, but there's OI Europe, there's OI Australia, OI USA, OII Sverige, and there's a lot of information. So I would like, most of all, that people would be interested and they would see that it's something that involves all of us, that it's a human rights issue.
Yeah.
It's a human rights violation what happens to us, and it's a human rights issue. And this idea, I guess the main thing is that normalcy is overrated, at least in my life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree.
Yeah.
I do.
So thank you. That's great.
Thank you so much, Del.
Yeah.
And thank you, OII Sverige, for all the important work that you do. And thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you for watching.
Happy Pride.